What is up, everybody? It is the True Epic Gamer here, back with another UFO 50 guide, this time going over the game Planet Zoldath. Now, the first thing that I want to talk about with this game, and most of you guys probably know this if you've played it a few times, is that the levels are procedurally generated, meaning they change every single time you play the game, at least the layout itself does. However, the fundamentals of the game and how items work doesn't change. And that is the main thing that you need to learn in this game, is what each item does, what things change every single time you restart, and what things stay the same. So let's start out by talking about the things that change every single time you restart or you die and have to start back from the beginning. Obviously, the layout of the map is going to change every single time, and that is the hardest part of this game, is remembering where everything is in your specific run. It really is down to its bare bones an exploration game and kind of a memory game, if I'm being honest, because you're going to see where you need to use an item, and then by the time you get to that item, you'll probably have forgotten where exactly you needed to use it, and you're going to find yourself just wandering around quite a bit. Now, another thing that changes every single time you start anew is what each species of animal or creature does in that specific run. Now, you'll notice that some creatures, every single time you start, there are going to be some creatures that you can talk to and you'll understand what they're saying. And there's going to be another race of creatures that you're not going to be able to understand. And that's why you need the item, the translator. We'll get into the items later and what each one individually does. But one thing I want to mention is every single run is going to have one species that you can talk to and one species that you can't quite understand. And the way to know if you can talk to them or can't talk to them at all is if they're not moving. And what I mean by not moving is not only are they not attacking you, but they're not changing the direction they're facing either. Because you'll also notice that there are some creatures that are passive creatures and they won't attack you, but they do turn like which way they're facing, and if you attack them, they will attack you back, and you can't communicate with these creatures at all, even with the translator. The reason that this is very important is the number one thing I can tell you guys about this is don't be racist, okay? Just because one species attacked you in your last run doesn't mean that that species is hostile in this run. So for example, you can see in my run in the background, I can talk to those scorpions. However, if I start a new run, it's entirely possible that the scorpions will be hostile in that run. Now, when it comes to communicating with these creatures, it's almost always a requirement that you're going to need to get the translator and talk to the ones that you can't understand at the beginning of your run. At least every single run that I've had, that's ended up being a requirement to get one of those treasure map pieces at the end. After you get the translator and you go talk to the species that you couldn't talk to at the beginning, you'll come to the realization that they probably have a trade, and it's going to be a trade normally straight up for one of the 3 map pieces that you need in order to beat the game. If they don't have the map piece, then they probably at least have some type of trade that you need in order to get to the map piece. That could be anything. It could be the hazard boots. It could be any item really. So long story short, the trades that you make with these different species that you can communicate with are extremely important. And the number one thing I would say is don't make a trade just because you found somebody to trade with. Make sure that you need that item first. And especially when it comes to trading the resources, I would recommend not doing any trades when it comes to just one resource for another, unless you've already found a reason that you need that resource. Now let's talk about the resources for a minute. Whenever I talk about resources, I'm talking about those items on your far right. You can see the different counters I have for them. You can call them whatever you want. I think the first one is crystals. The second one, I always consider them branches. The third ones are like rocks, some type of green rocks. And the fourth one, I just always say they're purple ants. They just kind of look like ants. Now, the resources, they change a little bit each time the game restarts as well. They always are the same items, but they change in rarity, and it seems that they change in which different creatures drop them as well. So you'll notice that every single match, there's at least one resource that you can barely find anywhere, and sometimes you can only find it on like one specific spot on the map. And one thing I want to mention for that is it will keep respawning in that spot. And you're normally going to need that rare resource in order to get something really important for your run. What you guys will notice in your runs is there's going to be one resource that's going to be all over the place, and sometimes you're going to need to get about 30 of those in order to buy a map piece. And also there's going to be one resource that's extremely rare and sometimes is only on one screen in your entire level. A lot of times that will end up being somewhere where you can't reach it, like you need to throw a boomerang across a cliff to grab it. And the thing I want to mention about those is normally that's the only spot on the entire map you can find it. It's not always that boomerang spot, but it's just going to be something that's a little bit hard to get to. Maybe some trees that you need to blow up in order to get to the two resources. But either way, they respawn constantly. I believe you need to walk 3 screens away and come back and it will be there again, but you can farm them a little bit because they will keep respawning in the same spot. But just like when it comes to making the trades with the different creatures, don't focus on the resources too much. Just get every single resource that you can until you come to the realization that you need a specific one for a specific reason. Then obviously you want to do your best in order to farm that or try and find it or make a trade for it. Another bit of information that could be helpful is that all the enemies respawn in the same spots as well. So if you realize that you need a certain resource and that enemy drops it, you just need to remember where you found that enemy and they'll have likely respawned by that point and you'll be able to get some more of the resource. Also, if you accidentally kill any NPCs, they will respawn as well. The last thing I want to talk about with the NPCs before we move on to what the items do is they can also give you secrets. And now these secrets are not things that you can figure out on your own. You need an NPC to tell you. For example, sometimes they will tell you an exact location and what you need to blow up in that location in order to find a secret. And it's not like there's going to be a crack in the wall to let you know otherwise. You pretty much need to talk to all the NPCs and see what they have to say, because there has been a lot of occasions for me where that is the only way to get all 3 treasure map pieces is by finding one of them with a secret that an NPC told me about. Alright, let's go ahead and dive into the part that you've probably all been waiting for, the items and what each one does. Let's start with the boomerang. The main way that the boomerang can be helpful is by reaching an item that is across a canyon that you physically cannot cross. So what this will be is you'll see a giant hole somewhere with an item across it, or potentially even a treasure map piece across it, and the only way you're going to be able to get it is with the boomerang. Every single item has one extremely required ability, and this is the boomerangs. Another useful way to use the boomerang is just to pick up items that are on top of little acid squares that you can't personally stand on. And obviously the last use for the boomerang is just to straight up take out enemies, and you can do this from quite a large distance. I should also mention that the boomerang is free to use because there are items that are going to take one resource every single time that you use them. Speaking of which, let's move on to our next item, the bomb. Now, the first thing that I want to mention is that the bomb is nowhere near as useful as the boomerang or some of these other items on the list, but that's not always important because you're going to be required to use specific items in your run, and there's no way of knowing which items they'll be until you run into a problem, such as trees that you need to blow up with a bomb, or a gap that you can only cross with the hazard boots. So really the importance of these items depends completely on your run specifically. Some other things I want to tell you about the bomb: you can't blow up the brick walls, and I think if you try and blow up the crystals then it will actually kill you, but any of just the normal trees, or you guys see like these orange trees, any of just the normal structures around the map you can blow up, but that is it. And like I mentioned before, you can use this to kill enemies, but it's not really ideal and it costs a resource. And one thing I want to mention about the items that cost resources, it's going to be random which resource it costs each time you start a new game. So in this run, it might cost me the green rocks. In another run, it might cost me the purple ants. Moving on to our next item, the drill gun. This is another pretty useful item because you are able to take out enemies from a medium range and you are able to get through the crystals. So similar to the way that if you see an important item across the canyon and you need a boomerang to get it, if you see crystals blocking your way to get somewhere that you have to get, then the drill gun will be a required item for your run. One thing I will say about taking out enemies with this drill gun is that some enemies do explode, and this can be the same case if you're taking them out with a boomerang. However, with a boomerang, you can take them out from much further, and it seems like the enemies that explode changes each match, but I could be wrong about that. I haven't entirely figured that out yet. Just always try and stay away if you can, because the explosion can wind up killing you. Let's talk about our next item, the hazard boots. These are one of my favorites. You can only hold 2 items in the game, and a lot of times I like to leave these on just because they're extremely useful. You'll notice that sometimes whenever an enemy explodes, they leave behind just a little bit of pink ground, like a couple of squares around where their body was, and you can't walk on these without damaging yourself. Now these can also just be around the map, and obviously sometimes there are areas that are completely blocked off and you can only reach them by having the hazard boots, otherwise you'll die from walking across the platforms. I like to keep these equipped, that way whenever I take out enemies, I can easily walk over their bodies and collect the resources without having to worry about damaging myself. Another pro tip is, you guys know how you can switch which item you have equipped. You don't actually need to switch to the boots in order for them to work. You just need to have them in your inventory and then they'll work on their own. You also notice that your character actually has yellow boots on screen, so that way you should always know if you can or if you can't walk over the acid platforms. Moving on to our next item, the Metamorpher gun. What this gun allows you to do is you can, 1, shoot it into a wall, and when it reflects back, it'll hit you and turn you into a small creature. This allows you to slip in areas that you were otherwise too big to slip through. Normally, this will be a brick wall where you can see a crack in it. I know those cracks look like you should be able to blow them up with a bomb, but that's just not how this game works. You need to turn yourself small and you can walk right through the crack. This also works with logs. If you see any logs that lead somewhere that you need to get to, then you just need to turn yourself small and you'll be able to walk right through them. Now, another little bonus tip that I figured out is if you have the hazard boots equipped and you're using the Metamorpher gun, when you morph enemies into small little birds or whatever it is, you can walk over them and actually take them out. And although you don't see the resources drop, the reason being is that you just automatically pick them up. So this, in my opinion, is actually the best combo just to walk around with, is the Metamorpher gun and the hazard boots as your little combo. But like I said before, you can't pick items just because you like them. You need to figure out which items you need in your run, and that's just kind of what you're going to be stuck with. Now let's quickly talk about the translator. This item only has one use that I know of, and that is, like I mentioned in the beginning of the video, allowing you to talk to the species that speaks gibberish at the beginning of the game. Like I said, there's one species you can already talk to, and then one species you can talk to, but you can't understand them until you get the translator. So there's really nothing too special about that item, but obviously it can be extremely valuable in your run. And from what I've noticed, it's almost always required in order to complete the game. Now let's talk about a much more unique item, that being the meat printer. What this does is it allows you to spawn in a piece of meat, and enemies will be attracted to this piece of meat. And although you can use this to lure enemies to your advantage, its main purpose is actually the snails that you normally see blocking a path. There is no way to destroy these snails. If you blow them up, it kills them, but their shell is still in your way, and majority of things just bounce right off of them. So what you do is once you get the meat printer, You just place a piece of meat in front of him, he'll walk out, get out of your way, and he'll stay out of your way for the rest of the game. Another useful tip with the meat printer is you can actually just eat the meat yourself, allowing you to heal yourself a couple of squares. But similar to the bomb, this will eat up one of your resources because they don't want you to just be able to heal infinitely. So keep an eye on your resources, see which one it's eating up, and make sure that you have enough to spare. And the last item here that I want to talk about is the pulse generator. This looks like a little detonator button, and rightfully so, because if you use this item, it will actually insta-kill every single enemy on the screen. Just remember that this is another item that does use up a resource, so make sure you're not just spamming it everywhere you go. Obviously, although that is a cool feature, it is not something that is required. The main purpose for the pulse generator is you'll notice in some places there are these blue gates blocking your way, and they look pretty electronic. You need to use the pulse generator in order to drop those gates and get by them. And the last thing I guess you could consider an item are the energy cubes, the red energy cubes you can find around the map. I think you can get 3 or 4 of those per level. And what these do is they increase your maximum health. If you look at the bottom right, those red squares, that's your health. For each one you get, it will just add it to the side and you'll be able to take more hits. Now let's talk about the 3 most important items in the game, that being the 3 pieces to the treasure map that you need to discover in order to win. So with the levels being randomly generated, obviously I can't just tell you guys exactly where the treasure map pieces are because they're in different spots every single match. However, I can help you find them a little bit. For example, anytime you see one of those like fortress doors, there's always going to be a treasure map piece in there. And I should also add that there's always going to be a lot of enemies and you're going to be required to use multiple items in order to get to that treasure piece, but it is going to be there every single time you see that. So once you locate that, you know you've already located one of the pieces. Another way that you can find a treasure map piece is by talking to all the NPCs like I talked about earlier before. A lot of times one of them will be selling a piece, and a lot of times it's going to be one that you can't communicate with without the translator. Another way that you may be able to find a piece is by an NPC telling you where a secret is. This can a lot of times be hiding a certain treasure map piece, or sometimes it can be hiding a vital item that you need in order to get to a piece. Either way, as soon as you see them tell you about a secret, you might as well assume that it is going to be required that you go wherever they're telling you to go. Because similar to the little underground fortress door, this is pretty much guaranteed leading you towards a treasure map piece. And the last way that I found a piece is just by exploring the map. Sometimes it'll just straight up be laying there, but it will need you to use a certain item. Like in this run here, it is just laying in the middle of the map, but I need the hazard boots in order to get to it. Another way I found it is it's just laying across a cavern. I just need to boomerang it, and that'll be it. So the best way I can tell you guys to get all 3 pieces in one run is just start out by exploring the map and keeping note of every time you see somewhere that you need to use a certain item, and especially keep note of everywhere that you know for a fact has a treasure map piece, such as the little fortress door or an NPC selling one. Once you've discovered everywhere where all 3 pieces are, then just get to work getting the resources you need or getting the items you need. And this can be easier said than done, but I will say, as long as you're not trying to get the cherry, just take your time. It's going to take a while. It's going to take you 20 to 30 minutes in order to beat this game. And don't give up on a run unless you're going for the cherry, which means you need to beat it in under 20 minutes. Because even though sometimes it feels like you're just walking around aimlessly and you're not making any progress, I promise you, if you just keep walking around, keep talking to the NPCs, you're going to realize what you're missing, because it is beatable every single time. Even though it's randomly generated, it's generated in a way that you 100% can beat it. You just need to figure out what it is that you're missing. And that is all I got for you guys today. I honestly can't believe this video winded up being as long as it is. I do apologize for the long video, but I just wanted to give you guys as much information as I possibly could. My voice is completely cooked after commentating this thing, but I hope you guys did enjoy it. Make sure to subscribe if you did, because we are so close to 1,000 subscribers. And of course, comment down below what games you guys want to see next. I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your day, and as always, peace.